Chris says I sound good, so gonna go ahead and trust him. But if I come through poorly for anyone else, just feel free to let me know. So today, really wanted to kind of talk through the experience we had with Event Vesta, the lessons we learned, and really importantly, how we got from just an idea, stereotypically on a paper napkin, into an actual platform with hundreds of customers, with venture-backed funding, and actual, mobile app as well as web app, but started by someone that's completely non-technical by background, and really walk you through kind of the couple different steps and processes that we use, and I think anyone in the audience here today could use to get it from that idea and get that technical co-founder to take their app to the next level, or that angel investment, or whatever else they need to really go to that next stage. So quick, kind of show of hands or throw in chat before I start running through all the different slides. Do you have a startup idea, or interested in potentially doing a startup one day, and that's why you've attended, or is there some other reason that you joined us today? Charles has an idea. That's awesome. Hopefully the next $1 billion idea out of Omaha. Nice. Joseph, or maybe Joe, love that you're working on a startup. That's awesome. It's both the best and worst thing that you'll probably ever do. Definitely the best though. Chris, love it. I've seen what you've done with Click Targeter, and it's a heck of a product already. So can't wait to see you get to the next level. And really the reason I'm asking that is for anyone in the audience, if you're have something else you're hoping to get out of it besides kind of building a product, building a startup that you can potentially scale, please drop it in the chat just so I can try to address it at some point. But really quickly about me and my background, what brought me to today. Born and raised in Omaha, went to Creighton twice over, thoroughly enjoyed it, really got a lot of different perspectives, and it got me started on my startup journey. I was able to join one of my professors with a company called DriveSpotter, went through 2 different accelerators, including Techstars here, and through that company, as well as with Event Vesta, have raised well over $2 million in venture funding. And with Event Vesta, recently launched that to really help address a huge issue that we saw in the events market. This is all pre-COVID, of course, so I'm sure, as everyone can imagine, the last 18 months have been very interesting, and can't wait till we can get back to normal here. But with Event Vesta, saw a huge opportunity to address the way that events are currently promoted and discovered. So for a organization like Do Space or Omaha Performing Arts, or even just your favorite local bar and restaurant, instead of taking 2 to 3 hours to go through and submit all of the events to the great outlets in Omaha, we take care of that with the click of one button, where we make sure it's submitted to Omaha Magazine or the Omaha World Herald, or all these other places that you need to submit your events if you want to help get that attendance that it deserves. And on the other end, for people like everyone on this call, we want to make it easier to find those events as well. So whether it's on our website or on our mobile app that's going to be coming here soon with, of course, Start Omaha Week, that we can help recommend those events to you based on your interest in coming soon, interest with friends. But as cool as all of this looks, as many customers as we have today, it's definitely not how it all started. As someone that's non-technical by background, I can't, to this day, still can't write a lick of code. Really had to figure out how to figure out this area, figure out this industry, and figure out what type of product we could deliver here, real value to real customers, but had to get it started from something. And it looked a little something like this. I actually went back through and found all the old wireframes back from late 2018, early 2019. And as you can see, it didn't quite look as sharp as it does today, but had to get started somewhere. And so what I want to kind of walk through the rest of this talk is covering the steps that it took for us to get from even, I guess, a little bit before these wireframes here, before we were able to get to this product today, and how really, even though looking at this makes me cringe just a little bit. It was a very important part of our journey, and we wouldn't be where we were today if we didn't have these slightly embarrassing stages that we had to go through to get there. So kind of breaking out into three large parts, there's kind of three important pieces to get to that next step. And really, I should take one step back before diving into each of these, that on a high level, the point of kind of going through this process that we use for Event Vesta is not that you're going to be able to use this to make, you know, $1 billion company with these tools themselves today without finding someone to actually build your program, or finding a technical co-founder to actually help build the platform and code it in a way that's sustainable and scalable. But really the point of this is to get you some traction, to get you some of that information and potentially some of that revenue, so that you can go and start talking with people that are developers to potentially join your team and join you as a co-founder. Or you can go to local angel investors and actually show that there is interest here. Because one thing that I know we faced when we were first getting Event Vesta off the ground, and I know from talking with plenty of other people in Omaha and other communities, is that, you know, like myself, if you're kind of the person with the idea, you're really excited about it, you know it's going to be the biggest thing ever. But when you're going to try to convince a co-founder, or go and convince someone that, you know, has a full-time job at Google or Mutual of Omaha or wherever, they have a lot of different opportunities. They have a lot of different ideas that they can go and do. And so it's not just always enough to have that really cool idea and try to convince them. Sometimes you need to show them, we already have this stuff that we've done on our own, or that I've done on my own. If you join onto this, you know, it's just going to be putting gasoline onto this fire, and we can really take it to that next level together, versus just going to them with that idea on the piece of paper. And, you know, they might be more excited, even if it's a terrible idea, about building, you know, a Facebook for dogs or whatever else they're excited about personally. And it's going to be much harder to convince them if you're both at square zero and have nothing proving which idea is going to win out in the end. So kind of breaking it out, wanted to break it out into these three pieces that I think roughly you could get through in around 3 months, which I know doesn't sound like a lot of time, but looking back, probably the only big regret that I have was that we didn't move faster through these stages, because you learn so much by going through them quickly and by actually just getting it out there, just getting something built and talking with customers, that we would have been able to accelerate everything in terms of getting our product built, in terms of getting customers on board for our day one. And just as a real life example, the time that it took, that it slowed us down, really cost us in the end, because we launched our product in September of 2019, which I'm sure, as everyone's well aware, just a few months down the line, we saw COVID hit. And so if we could have accelerated everything and launched in May of 2019 or June of 2019 instead of September, that would have had a very big impact on everything that would have happened. And we could have been in a much stronger position going into COVID, or whatever unexpected, you know, challenge was to come our way. So I just kind of say that with, there's always a reason to delay. There's always a reason to think that it can be better, but sometimes you just have to, you know, be willing to have your baby be called ugly and figure out how to adapt it. And we'll get into some strategies and some ways of how that's important here in the next couple steps. So the three parts are: one, really finding the problem, which we'll get into a few kind of tips about what I'm talking about with finding the problem. I'm sure a few of you maybe had heard about that or have some ideas there, but we have some lessons from what we've learned. Second part is actually designing the solution based on the feedback and really that true problem that you discover from those conversations. And then the last one, fake it till you make it. It's a little bit tongue in cheek. Really the point there is, you know, as much time as you can put into designing the solution, as much time as you can put into talking about the problem, sometimes you just need to build something, which we'll get into what something can be, and get it out there to start getting that feedback from the customers. Because at the end of the day, you're going to find the most information from that versus even these other two stages. So sometimes you kind of just have to be that magician and use those paper clips and bubble gum to put something together to get out there in front of customers. So kind of diving right in for the first part of finding the problem. When I talk about that, there's a couple key steps and things that were really important and useful for us to keep in mind. Of the goal of this is, you know, you have something ideally that you yourself or a family member or significant other, someone has experienced, of that you can kind of be that customer zero. For me, with Event Vesta, I had 4 years experience promoting events for Creighton and for a volunteer organization with the chamber. So I had a pretty good feel of, what was possible in the industry and really what should be easier, what should be going better than what it currently was. And so kind of that first step for finding that problem is trust your gut of if there's something in your day-to-day life where you're just like, there's got to be a better way to do this, or like if I could do this better, I'd be willing to pay $100 or $200, to get this off my plate. That's the sort of thing that can really lead to something deeper if it checks off these next couple steps. And even looking at very successful companies of whether it's Twilio, which is a multi-billion-dollar company, they got which allows you to send text messages through an automated system to customers or users or whoever else with your system. They got started on that because he had a skate shop and he was trying to send them text messages for scheduling a time to come in and pick up their skateboards after they were done. Obviously, they figured out there was something there with the text messaging, not so much with the skate shop, and the rest has been history for them. Obviously, Airbnb with the renting the blow-up mattresses in their apartment, figuring that if they could build something here, then maybe they'd be onto something. So step one really is kind of trusting your gut, because if you have that informed experience, it's incredibly important for helping you figure out when you're at a fork in the road, which way you should go. Second part is, though, you can't fully rely on your gut for that, because while it might be good for helping you figure out if there's an area or someplace you should be looking, at the end of the day, you just have one opinion, you just have one perspective. And so you really need to go and dig in deep with other customers or other people that might be interested in that solution or might also be having that problem to figure out, what's their perspective on it. Is this something that is a problem that they're facing, or is there already a product out there or some other solution that they're using to solve that? For Event Vesta, we went and talked with over 25 different organizers of all types, from sports to music to nonprofits to bars and restaurants, to try to kind of figure out what was the common trend lines, what were the common pain points across all of those industries, to really be sure that we were onto something and that there was a big problem in the market. And in particular, the big thing you want to do when you're digging in deep with your customers, when you're having those conversations, is really making sure that it's an important problem that you're trying to solve to that customer. The reason there's these, aspirin looking pills on this part of the slide is because something that I've heard that's always stuck with me from Peter Thiel, who started PayPal, is there's two types of pains, that people feel or businesses feel. And some of them are kind of just annoying. It's something that, if you're going to have a physical pain, it's just kind of like a headache. Like you could just take some aspirin to get over it. Like you're pretty annoyed by it, but you're not really going to change your entire day or your entire life to go out and solve that problem. Where on the other hand, you have those problems that are just so severe and so bad that it's, the business equivalent of breaking your leg, and you need to go to the emergency room right now to address it. That if someone could solve that for you, you would do about anything to take that off of your plate and get that done. And especially as a startup, you really want to focus on those latter problems. Of sometimes those aspirin level problems, they can turn into a big business in one way or another, but there's so many different things working against you that I'd heavily advise you to really dig in and make sure that you're addressing that really pressing problem that they're trying to address, because that'll make your sales easier. That'll make it significantly easier if you actually get something built and off the ground and adopted, even in those early days. And the other piece with that is, even if, or going back to our experience, we had those 20 odd conversations with different potential customers. And with each of them, we'll talk with kind of the full span of events, from planning vendors to come in, to managing a budget, to doing tickets at the door, to selling beer, to like the whole thing end to end. And what blew me away was when we were doing that conversation, I would ask them at the end, after we had talked through, of like, okay, it sounded like, these were the top 2 or 3 things that you really wanted to address when, in terms of events, or that you would try a new platform for. And they'd be like, yeah, those are definitely the biggest problems that I face. I'm like, great, cool. So, for the first one, how much would you pay me a month if I had a product that could solve that? for the second one, how much would you pay me to solve that? And more times than I could count, after I would ask them that question, that list would dramatically change. Even if the answer on the third most important one, that might be the one that they would pay the most for. On the first one, there's one that stuck out. For the first two things they listed, they're like, oh yeah, those are huge problems. Like, it's a huge problem for me to organize my event, for me to keep track of where everything's at, to manage it, to do the project management for that. And then I asked them, okay, great. So, how much would you pay me a month? And they pretty much, looked at me like I was nuts. And they're like, I wouldn't pay you anything for that. If it was free, I guess I'd sign up and use the tool. I was like, okay, interesting. Really appreciate you telling me that. What about the second problem of promoting your events, and getting more people to attend? Like, oh yeah, that's a really big problem. I'd pay you $30 a month for that. And I'm just sitting there like, that's incredibly valuable information for me to know, because I could have spent all this time, all this energy building this awesome project management tool for them to manage their events better and be more efficient within all these great things. But at the end of the day, they wouldn't have cared. They would have maybe signed up for a free version where they were really interested in paying $30 for that promotion service, and was something that we had heard from other customers as well, and is what we did end up building at the end of the day. So don't just have those conversations with customers, but really kind of press them to make sure that when they tell you it's an issue, that they actually are willing to put their money where their mouth is at the end of the day. And so to do that, couple quick tools and resources we use that were very effective. We're first, using surveys. As simple as it is, honestly, still to this day, we use Google Forms. They're not the prettiest, but they're the most flexible. It's the easiest to do some different data analysis with them, at least for the price point. But the important thing I would say about surveys is we had a lot of success by taking a qualitative approach where we'd sit down with someone, and then a quantitative one where we would have those, dozen or so conversations, and then we'd send a survey to 30 people, really making sure that the answers we got from those first 10 people checked out with that broader number. And I would really kind of advise you to take that approach as well, of don't just do a survey day one of like, oh, I think there's a huge problem in the rubber ducky manufacturing industry, so I'm going to send out this huge survey to see if I can validate it. I would instead sit down with 3 or 4 different people making the rubber ducks, and then send the survey to the rest, seeing if what those couple people told you about that industry actually checks out on the broader scale. Second part is, it's not really a tool, but it's definitely a resource of have to dig in and use your network. So I looked through my LinkedIn, looked through friends of friends, asked for introductions so that I could have those couple dozen conversations with potential customers, because you got to get a little scrappy to have those conversations. Because at the end of the day, you're not always lucky enough to know that many people day one. But you would be amazed when you would reach out on LinkedIn, or someone would connect me, if I'd asked them that I was just looking for their advice and not trying to sell them anything, how generous and how giving, especially people here locally, were to have those conversations and meetings and give us really good feedback. So I'd say don't be nervous to reach out, because all in all, it was a great experience and probably one of the most fun parts in times of building the company, of having those early conversations with those potential customers. And then the last thing that I'd recommend for you to look at is it's a type of interview. It's called the jobs to be done interview format, where there's a lot of great resources online for you if you just Google it, from Harvard Business School and other places, where they kind of talk through, here's the way to structure your interview to make sure that you're getting really good information about why a customer made this decision, what their thought process was, what they were thinking through when they had this pain point or when they had this problem. And it was something we didn't do day one, but something that was introduced to us after we've been running the company for a year and a half. And I would say that I wish we would have known it when we were first getting off the ground, because it was an incredibly impactful and useful format for us to use in our customer conversations. So before I move on to the next step of actually designing the solution based on all these conversations and points of feedback that you heard, are there any questions on really kind of drilling in and finding that problem that's worth addressing?
Hey folks, I'm just going to chime in real fast. If you do have a question, feel free to leave it in chat. We might be able to circle back to it if it does come to you.
Yeah, and I did see one come through here from Chris where he talked, he asked if I could talk a little bit more about the jobs to be done interview style. Um, and yeah, so the example with that um, is I'm just gonna look up real fast uh, the link. I don't have the browser open, so I'll have to do it at the end to drop it in there. But um, really, it's a really useful format for kind of thinking through how to ask the questions and making sure that you're not biasing in, that you're really kind of getting a good understanding for the customer's viewpoint and what the customer thinks and feels versus what uh, you're asking them, and making sure you're not leading them. So uh, we learned it through applying through for Techstar Chicago. Their managing director asked that we go through the process with some customers and potential customers so that they got an understanding of why what we were doing mattered at the end of the day to the market. And they had a great 2-minute explainer video by Clayton Christensen, who's chair of strategy for Harvard Business School, done a million different tools and things of that nature to help businesses be better with their strategy. And they did this for McDonald's. I don't know if it was McDonald's across the entire country or just a franchise owner, but it was with some level of McDonald's. And they sat outside because they're trying to increase their milkshake sales. So they sat outside and watched every time someone bought a milkshake, they marked it down. And the craziest thing they noticed was when they marked that down, they realized that over 50% of the people bought those milkshakes before 8 a.m. in the morning, because the job that those people were hiring the milkshakes to do was to really be kind of like a filling, a little bit of a sugary, exciting breakfast. So if they were focusing on how to, really sell it as the best dessert or the chocolatiest milkshake possible, they're really kind of missing the mark, because that's not why a lot of the people were looking to purchase that milkshake. They were looking to do it as a breakfast substitute. So kind of just by following that format and using some of the resources online, you might be able to get some of those really kind of interesting insights into your the problem that you're solving, or if you already have a product that you're already using a little bit, how people think and feel about it with that format. So moving on to kind of the second step after you've had those, I would recommend at least 10, if not, closer to 20 or 30 of those interviews, and then maybe a survey or two to really make sure that you're onto a problem that people care about and want to have solved, that people want to solve. It's time to, build it so that they'll come, right? A little bit of the field of dreams of building something that they're interested in and seeing if that will solve that problem that they described to you. And so with that, this is where things can go quite a bit off the rails in terms of, really trying to build out that full platform. Because at least if you're anything like me, you have some big aspirations. You want to build this giant platform that's going to solve all of these problems and be the greatest thing since sliced bread. And we still have that goal today. We still are continuing to try to build something that's uh, the sum is going to be much bigger than each of the parts is today. But I wish that we would have honed in a little bit more, been a little bit leaner, a little bit more focused with what we're trying to do day one to just get it off the ground. And that's really kind of the first piece of advice of when you're trying to wireframe that solution of, thinking through all the feedback that you got, those problems that they described, try to figure out that trend line and create the leanest version that you could get started with today. And I have a picture of a rocket there because even someone like Elon Musk, who has resources beyond all of our wildest dreams, right? He was trying to solve the problem of going to Mars and setting up multi uh, planetary colonies, but he had to work that back to something that he could get done day one to build that process to that future goal. And it started with, well, to get to Mars, I need probably a really big rocket, but no one will buy a really big rocket. So, let's build a reusable rocket so that we can get the resources into space. But even before the reusable rocket that really took off for them, they had to design their first rocket, for commercial use. So um, anybody that was talking with him day one, when they were just building this rocket for the U.S. government to use or for private companies, it had almost nothing to do with that end goal of where they wanted to be in 20 years in terms of being able to directly apply that technology, but it allowed them to build those stepping stones and get that knowledge, and most importantly, that revenue, so that they could keep building towards that long-term end goal. So I would, challenge you that it's really important to have that long-term vision of where you want to be in 10 or 15 years when you're a billion-dollar company, but try to work back today to like, what's that first piece you need and how can you leverage it to meet that point while serving your customer needs. And then from there, it's time to build that ideal solution. I'll get a little bit into that in kind of the next step where I talk a little bit about the tools and resources we use of exactly how to do that. But there's definitely a lot of ways where you can do it without having to actually build that code, and where you can still get the customer feedback. Because really, at the end of the day, that's the point of this wireframing step is, you've validated that there's a problem. We've had these conversations, so you know that people care. So now it's time to build those wireframes and then go out and see if the customers actually care. When they told you that they had this problem for, in our case, promoting events, do they expect it to look and feel like it did? Are they happy with the end results of what we've gone back to say that we wanted to build? Because at the end of the day, you could build the best looking wireframes ever. You could build something that sounds so cool on paper, but if those customers that told you that they had this problem that they're willing to pay for, if you take it to them and they're not excited, they're not like, yeah, when can I sign up for this? You've got a little bit of a problem. And so you need to take that customer input and refine it until they are excited, until they tell you like, yes, this is something I'd be really interested in doing. Because frankly, that's exactly what we did. We went and built our wireframes using some of the tools I'll get to in a second, and went back to all of those couple dozen customers that we had talked with and a few new ones, and got around 15 of them to sign letters of intent that we then later used to raise our initial funding to build the platform to actually go and bring them on as true customers. But if we never would have taken that step of doing the wireframes, of getting something out there and showing it to customers, we never would have been able to actually kind of take our business to the next level. And it still just would have been a really cool idea that we had that just kind of died on the vine. So in particular, to do that, the most important piece is you're going to need a wireframing tool. Now, there's a couple of them out there, but the one that I would recommend from our experience using all of them is Figma, because most importantly, it's free, which is always great, but it's also very easy to use. It's very easy to share mockups and wireframes with other people, where I guess for anyone that's unfamiliar with the wireframe, that's where if you have, an app, instead of having to actually build all of these pieces of the app, you could instead put together essentially a mockup or a wireframe of these different elements, which is something we still use today in product design, where you could show the user what it's like to use these different pieces of, or these different parts of the app or the product to get their feedback before you ever write a line of code. And even to this point where we have a full-time developer working all day long on building our product, we still use the heck out of these wireframes because we want to make sure that he's building the right product that our customers or our users are actually interested in, spending my time instead of his to figure that out. So it's something where once you get started with it, you're never really going to stop using this entire process, but especially that wireframing piece, it's invaluable to you to get started with it day one. And back to my old examples, those wireframes don't always have to look great at the very outset, because the whole point is just to figure out, like, directionally, is this something they're interested in when you explain it to your customers, potential customers, and show it to them. The other key piece of that, and another reason I'd recommend Figma, and something we learned a little bit too late, is there are tons of design templates out there. And the reason I have these kind of little blocks here is kind of like Lego blocks of, you can use those design templates so that you don't have to be the best designer in the world, but you can go out there and find a admin dashboard template to use for your analytics dashboard, or you could go and find a Airbnb template if you're doing something that has a similar look and feel, so that instead of having these not very beautiful wireframes like ours were day zero, at least you can use those designs and those templates so that it looks really good. And then you can get feedback on the functionality and still look like you're a cut above the rest. So especially with Figma, if you just Google Figma template, Figma UI template plus whatever type of app, or if there's a competitor or an interface out there, system out there that looks similar that you think you could adapt for your use case, then Google for that type of template or that clone of a template. And there's usually something similar out there that you can use and adapt so you can make it look good to actually take it back to your customers and get that feedback. And then the final thing I'd recommend that was super useful for this stage for us was the Masters of Scale podcast. It's with Reid Hoffman that founded LinkedIn, and he goes through and interviews. At this point, it's been well over 100 different entrepreneurs, from Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, to the Airbnb founder, to Instagram, to TaskRabbit, to Salesforce. You name it, really, any industry, any successful company. He talks to them about the early days, about what they did to get to that size and scale. And it's just incredibly helpful hearing that even these companies we look at today, that are household names that have billions of dollars in revenue, started somewhere pretty silly and pretty ugly, and had to kind of brute force some things to get through to that point. So I would definitely recommend listening to the podcast overall, but especially as you're trying to build your company, because he has a couple different mantras and philosophies that have been incredibly helpful for us. Probably the biggest one being that if you're not embarrassed with the first version of your product, or in this case, those wireframes you're showing to your customers, then you've launched too late. And that you really have to get comfortable with getting it out there, refining it, and making it better over time. But if you sit around until it's perfect, you're going to die as a company, or you're never going to get your idea launched and off the ground. And it's a mantra that I still have to repeat to myself to this day. But at least for me, it's been incredibly helpful for having the confidence to get it out there, and start getting that feedback, even though I'm not, I'm still pretty self-conscious of what it actually looks like on paper. So Katie asked if I could get more details on where to find a template, what a template is, and how to load it into Figma. So great question. So in terms of where to find it, usually that's where I'd recommend doing a search for, like, I'm just typing it into the chat here. Sorry, everyone, hold on. Something like that. I just used Airbnb, but I would use, if there's a similar type of company or something tangential where you could say, like, in our case, we used Airbnb for our events, or we used Tinder because we have a little bit of that Tinder-esque interface, which I guess isn't shown on this page, but is in this really cruddy wireframe where you could hit the button to swipe right or hit the button to swipe left, for the events that you're interested in. So we looked up, Figma template plus Tinder clone, so that we could get what that UI pattern and what it looks like. The last type of search that I would advise you is something like that, where you just go with a generic description of what your company type is, so like a SaaS, software as a service company, or an analytics company. That if you try some searches kind of in that vein for something similar to what you're trying to do, you should be able to find something that you can download. And from there, they're usually either free in a lot of cases, because they're just for design and inspiration, or they're maybe $15 to $50. And when you purchase it or download it, they usually just download straight as a Figma file, which you can then either download the desktop app for sure on Mac, I believe Windows as well. And then Figma also has a great web tool to use where you would just upload that. So all in all, it's pretty easy to go through and do that. Shouldn't take more than, with the Googling to figure out the templates that you actually like, what they look like, 15 or 20 minutes to find that template to get started. And then what's cool is you can share that template when it's done with the prototyping tools with those customers, whether you're sitting down with them in person or if you send it to them as an email follow-up asking for some feedback on what they think. It's a really slick way to get that feedback. Don't use Keynote or PowerPoint like I did in the past. Definitely use Figma or something like that. So great question, Katie. Any other questions on this kind of middle step of designing that initial solution? All right, well, if you think of anything, don't be afraid to throw it in chat. Once again, really kind of the point of this is to confirm that what you've built or what you're thinking is actually in line with what your customers want and what your customers are interested in using. You don't need to have it perfectly nailed down. You don't need to have the perfect design. And you can always adjust it. And no matter what, you will adjust it when it comes time to build. So, don't be afraid about building something and just getting that feedback, because that's the most important part. And on that theme, get to the final part of the fake it till you make it. So once again, the point of this is not to be a scammer or overpromise and underdeliver on your product or make your customers upset with you or anything like that. The point of it is very much to how can you build something beyond that wireframe that they can interact with, that they could get a taste of what that solution looks like, so that you can really go above and beyond and show that people really do care about what you're working on and that they will use it because they already are in a lot of ways. And so the point of this, or a couple pieces of advice, and the point of this at the end of the day is to really continue to get that customer input and refine it, and prove that people are interested. So kind of going backwards on this one, even with the wireframes, even sitting down and walking through it, you will be surprised the type of feedback you will get versus from the wireframes versus the first version of your product. So back to our experiences and why it's just important to get it out there. You're never going to guess what the biggest complaint with your product your customers are going to give you, so you've actually put it into their hands. In our case, it was that they wanted a custom cropping photo tool ahead. Nothing to do with their belief on how well we could submit the events to omaha.com or wherever else. In fact, actually, the first version that we pushed out there, you couldn't even select those calendars. You just clicked promote, and we did everything else on the back end for you. In terms of sending it to those calendars, you only knew which calendars we were sending it to. We followed up with you after you had gone through and put it in there. But it turned out that they were really stuck on the fact that they had to upload a photo with the exact dimensions, and that they couldn't upload a photo and crop it. And so we had to go and find a third-party tool to integrate into our site. But that's the type of thing where until you actually build something that they can play with, you're not going to find out those pitfalls or those things that you assume when you have the wireframes. And the other part of it is to prove that people are interested. It's one thing like we did to get those letters of intent, which once again, very much for this version of the product as well as the previous version, I would heavily encourage you to get those types of things put together to show those potential stakeholders or investors or co-founders how seriously people are interested in your product, to really help prove that they're interested. I'll also get to it here in a second with those tools and resources, but there's a few other ways that you can build on top of that besides just the letters of intent to prove that people are interested. But it all kind of hinges on building a version of your product. And the reason I have the A in quotations is that this is probably the one that has the most variety of directions that you could go. There are a few tools that I'll recommend that you could use to build that first version to get that feedback, but that's going to look different for everyone. For instance, I know in Chris's case, he used some great tools from Google Data Studio to get his first product off the ground. And even before that, had some crazy complicated Excel things that he used, which allowed him to prove his product. For us, we didn't do this, but in retrospect, we probably should have, of what we're, providing that service of submitting your event to all these different calendars, we probably should have just made a Google form that allowed someone like a local bar to pick, I want it to go to Omaha Magazine and omaha.com and Channel 3 and nowhere else. And then yours truly here just goes in there, logs in, and submits those events on their behalf manually, right? Just to kind of prove that people actually would use the service and would care about it. So really, this is kind of the one where you want to get it as scrappy as possible, just to start getting that feedback and seeing if people are willing to put their money where their mouth is and start using it. Very much, it's not going to be scalable, but that's the point. It's just to get that feedback and just to see what's going on. So with that, there are definitely a couple tools that I would recommend and resources. The first one would be, even before the actual platforms or applications, is if you search this, you should find it as the first video result on Google. But Y Combinator has this great 30-minute video by Michael Seaball, who was co-founder of Twitch. He's on Reddit's board. He's the head of Y Combinator, all about what it means to plan an MVP in the Y Combinator parlance. So you'll hear people throw around MVP or minimum viable product, but it's kind of a amorphous term. It seems like everyone has their own definition. But Y Combinators was super interesting, of its really kind of proving what is that, feature, or will your customers care about that initial version of your product. So he walks through what Twitch's MVP looked like. He walks through what Airbnb's MVP looked like, and he walks through what Stripe's MVP looks like, all of which are billion-dollar plus companies. And let me tell you, those websites and those things were really not that impressive, but it was enough to show, will the customers interact with it? Will people sign up? Will people use it? Just as an example of how, lean that MVP can look, for the Airbnb website, you could message me to say, hey, I'm interested in your place, but you couldn't rent my apartment, or you couldn't pay me through the Airbnb app or website. We had to schedule that on our own, or you had to give me cash when you arrived at my apartment. But they were just trying to prove, would people trust me enough to take, would people trust this app enough to list their apartment on there? And would someone actually reach out to me to say, yeah, I want to crash on your couch for the weekend? To see your question, Katie, I don't have a link, but if you Google that, it'll pop right up, either on YouTube or on Google. At least it should. If not, I'll try to grab it here in a second to put in there. And then the other two are ways to help build that MVP and build that first version of the product that you can use. Once again, these aren't the only options. Another kind of example, Run the World, if anyone's heard of that. It's like a digital conference provider, but she raised $1 million seed round or pre-seed round in Silicon Valley. But she said that she did that by using Zoom and Slack and kind of like hacking those together to show what this really cool video conference solution could look like. We're able to chat with people, we're able to do these breakout rooms and all these other things. So very much paperclip and bubblegum for her, but it obviously worked and helped her kind of scale to that next level. Some other ones that we've used and played around with and seen people use very well, of course, WordPress. Similar thing is with Figma. There's a million WordPress templates out there, so I'd very much encourage you to try to use one of those for that initial version, because you could really use it for a number of different things, of whether it's, an example of like if you're trying to build a marketplace where someone could, list their product and someone else could buy it. You could very easily use a WordPress gallery for that. Very easily use WordPress for any type of blog or any type of service where it's written by someone. And then the other one that's super powerful is called Adalo, ADALO, and they allow you to build both web apps as well as mobile apps with no code. And for the mobile apps, at least, if you pay for a higher tier, you can actually push those live to the App Store and allows you to interact with users, have accounts. It's a super, super powerful tool. Would heavily recommend that you check it out if you need that kind of initial version as well, for especially a mobile app, because you can't really cheat a mobile app on WordPress or anything else. And then the other one that I would recommend, and this is back to proving that interest of, nothing's going to be having people actually use an application or use whatever that initial MVP that you can build, which once again, I would, watch that video that was dropped in the chat to figure out what that MVP can and should look like for you. I would use a service called Card, with an extra R there, .co. It's card.co is the website. It's like $9 and you get access to all of their templates. It also hosts the web link for you, or you can give it its own custom URL. And you can build these no-code one-page websites super quickly and easily using it. And we still use it to this day to spin something up super quickly and cheaply when we just need to get something out there in front of customers to see if they're interested. So if you're looking, especially if you have a consumer app or something consumer facing, that's a great way that you can build that landing page on Card where you could send people to sign up for a mobile app like we did with this page right here for our company that I just dropped in chat. Or you could use it to sell a service as well of why they should sign up for this one over here. But you can use these two in combination to kind of prove that people are interested, to prove that people will buy your product or use it once it's live, with the intent of going to an investor, going to that potential co-founder and saying, hey, I know you thought I was crazy, but I spun this stuff together. Like, it's not going to hold forever, but we got 50 people to sign up, or we got 100 people to sign up, because at the end of the day, that's what will drive their interest. That's what will get people excited, not just trying to pitch them on the Steve Jobs dream and just trying to pitch them on this is going to be the coolest thing ever if you buy in, because unfortunately in Omaha, that doesn't always work. So with that, there's about 10 minutes left. So I'd love, to hear what questions you all have, whether it's on this piece in particular, or if there's places kind of in this process of trying to get from an idea like Joseph and Charles, or potentially Katie, it sounds like, to that first version of your product where I could potentially be helpful. So Joseph, it was card.co, which I just put in there, which that mobile app.eventvesta.com is a website that we did. I did like last week using that service. So you can see what like a live version of that site looks like in terms of, like I said, being able to point it to a custom URL. So would heavily recommend it, especially for the $9 or whatever. It's crazy good value. Katie. So for us, we did kind of, since we did a good enough job with our wireframes, we actually didn't build as much of that no code visual tool. And also some of these services like Adalo launched after we had already launched our company, or at least we heard of it after that point. Maybe otherwise we would have done it earlier. But it took me probably 2 to 3 months to build something and kind of build out these different pieces. But really, I chalked that up to kind of 3 different things. One, if I would have known about a superior tool like Figma, it would have been quicker, especially if I had a template to use instead of having to try to design everything from scratch, and had those kind of design inspirations to build off of. But really kind of the third piece was, I think with this, it's so easy to get caught up in like, I need to make this better, or this isn't cool enough yet. But just drawing some hard lines in the sand, if I would have done a better job of that, of saying by, the end of June or by the end of August, no matter what, I'm going to have shown this to 10 people. That'll really kind of help you accelerate and get that pushed out, because really at the end of the day, we grew more from each of those meetings and conversations with potential users instead of just me sitting alone in my, house trying to build the perfect product. I guessed wrong in multiple different places or overbuilt it where they didn't care about it. But those conversations really pointed me in the right direction and helped me see something like this was viable or not. And really, I mean, it was a little bit prettier than this. It definitely looked prettier than this version, but wasn't that much better that people signed letters of intent to use once it was live. So your software really doesn't have to be that beautiful to get real potential customers and users interested in it. But those were great questions. Are there other ones or, follow-up ones to that? All right. Well, if there are any other questions, feel free to throw them in there. Otherwise, be more than happy to talk offline. Of either feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Andrew Prystai. There's not a lot of us floating out there, so pretty easy to find me. Or you can shoot me an email, Andrew at eventvesta.com. Would be more than happy to follow up offline and talk more about what you're thinking and see if I have any suggestions on how you can build that MVP. And would definitely, if you're looking for other cool events in the Omaha area, if you went to eventvesta.com and checked us out and maybe even signed up if you were interested. But if there's no other questions, then appreciate you joining us and hope you learned something valuable today.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for your time. This was incredibly interesting. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that and appreciate you having me.
Of course, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us. With that, we're going to wrap it up. Just one last thank you again for lending your knowledge and time here. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, look forward to doing this again soon.